Hello, my name is Sarah Beyer. I'm Outreach Manager for Deep Roots, and I'm excited to welcome you back to our Native Gardening virtual series today. This session is being recorded and will be available online in the next few days. If you go to deeprootskc.org/stayhomekc, you can view these recordings anytime. I'm especially excited about today's presentation. I think this is information that just about anyone can use. Sometimes when we talk about the benefits of native plants or about native gardening, the conversation can feel very like all or nothing. And so I think this is really helpful because every single plant matters. So even if you aren't ready to start a whole new garden or redo your entire landscaping, we hope you'll be inspired by today's program to do a little something by adding some native plants to your existing gardens. So I'd like to introduce our speakers for today who are going to help us make that happen, Zack and Kristen Herrmann. Zack and Kristen own and operate City Roots Nursery and Landscape. They are passionate about native landscaping and growing plants, and they're excited to share that with all of us today. Zack and Kristen, welcome.
Hi.
Oh,
Hello.
here we go.
All right, so we're Kristen and Zack with City Roots Nursery, and this is adding native plants to existing landscapes.
So whether this is your first time adding native plants to your garden, or you've already have some native plants and you're adding some, and you're adding to a new area, or maybe you're a landscape professional looking to add natives to clients' houses, we just kind of have found through our experience this like a basic little checklist to make sure you're getting headed on the right direction before you start designing. The first three of these seem pretty common sense and are probably used for any landscape design, but pay attention to your sun exposure, shady areas, sunny areas, same with your wet and dry areas, what type of soil types you have going on. Is it a really rich soil, more rocky soil, well-drained soils? And then kind of as you start to, as you're thinking about adding the natives, try to pay attention to what are the currently existing landscape plants. Is this more of a classical garden? Is there boxwood hedges? Is it more of like a wilderness or like shade gardens? Just so you can kind of start to get an idea of themes and what native plants might work with what's currently going on. And then another thing that kind of is, are the current plants that are even planted in like the correct spaces? Like sometimes you'll see evergreens that have been put in too much shade, or some sort of flowering shrub that's been put out in blasting sun. This might be a good time that these plants could be replaced with something native, or maybe you could use that to note what won't work in a spot. Another thing we do is we get a lot of measurements. We really want to figure out what's the area we're working with, so we know the amount of plants we need to get to properly fill a space, but also know how much space we're working with so that we don't overpack with put too much of any one type of thing in. So those are kind of some easy basic tips. As you're identifying what plants are in that current landscape, you're probably going to come across a good amount of invasive species. There's a lot of these in classical landscapes, anything from roses, sharons, burning bushes, a lot of winter creeper, Japanese honeysuckle, plethora of other annoying vines and such things. But a lot of these will be hard to establish a new bed or a new planting in if there's a lot of them present. So it's probably a good thing to go ahead and start removing a lot of these. A lot of different ways to do this depending on what time or budget you have. For example, we just go through and rip a lot of stuff out, digging out honeysuckles by root, but that requires a lot of labor, or if you're hiring people, that can get expensive. If you're just dealing with like turf grass, there's a lot of easier things that you can do, such as putting down silage cloths or heavy duty weed mat, or sometimes people use newspaper. They even make and sell biodegradable weed mat now that you can put down, and just to kind of kill things underneath. And usually we leave it on through summer and then could do like a fall planting. Or obviously for larger things, or depending on what you're getting rid of, sometimes herbicides are necessary. Then another thing that we just kind of, once you are getting more into the designing phase, to keep in mind is place-based planting. So pretty basic concept, but right place, right plant in the right place. So as we've identified our areas. We know we're working with maybe a dry, shady spot, or we're working with like a really sunny spot that has really well-drained soil. What we can start to do now is come up with plant lists that might work and research those plants and see. What I tend to look at a lot is, where does those plants grow in the wild? What's its condition like there? And then I try to see, will that work in this condition in this garden? And if it won't, it's better to probably find a different plant rather than trying to make this plant work in a place that it might not actually work out for it. So we tend to find, if you stick to those basic concepts, they'll help you pick the right plants and have a more successful garden.
And then these are just a few of the most common plants that we run across when we're landscaping. And so we'll just go through these and kind of talk about landscape concepts, how to incorporate native plants into a garden that already has these plants existing. So first off, we'll start with irises. We run into irises in just about every garden. They're sentimental for a lot of people. A lot of them come from grandmother's gardens. This is our front yard. These are ones that I got from a landscape client, so they're in my yard because they mean something to me. They're pretty easy to add just about any native plant to. The things that we usually know are just different textures that go with the irises. So behind, there's like prickly pear, there's Missouri evening primrose, and then we have, they're not popping up yet, but we have a huge prairie dock that grows up behind these in late summer, and then we have Liatris and Baptisia as well. What we also try to do after taking into account texture is we'll look at bloom time. And so, you know, these irises happen to bloom in the spring and the fall. And so I get like a very late October bloom on these, but then now, of course, they're going to start blooming now and end in May. And so the rest of the plants that I planted around will start to bloom just as the iris is going down to sleep for the summer. So those are the best things to look for the iris, the texture, and then the bloom time of the other plants. And then when you find an iris in your garden, it's really difficult to tell whether it's going to be a wet spot or a dry spot or, you know, part shade or anything, because they're very hardy plants. So they're not a good indicator of like what natives to plant around. So you'll probably have to do a little bit more research to make sure that the native plants can fit with that iris. And then next, boxwoods and yews. We were going to expand this into a whole evergreen section, but it got too complicated. So we'll reduce it to boxwoods and yews that are mostly used for hedges. Commonly, you'll see these used where you'll have the hedgerow and then you'll have mulch in front or behind. And the mulch is a really good place to add in natives. So you can start to get to a point where you mostly have green mulch. This is a boxwood shrub that's kind of been created to be like the French style that we'll plant next month. We're going to plant obedient plant in the middle of the boxwoods. So as you're looking from it from the street or from the house, in the midsummer, you'll just see the obedient plant blooms above the boxwoods. A few things that we've mentioned in front of the evergreen shrubs. These are fairly low growing plants for the most part. Missouri evening primrose, purple poppy mallow, a variety of sedges that you can research, figure out which ones you like, what textures and colors. Pussy toes, fame flowers, native sedum, and wild hyacinth are all great in front of the boxwoods. And then behind the shrubs, depending on what you're looking for, it's very easy to add forbs behind the boxwoods. And so you can kind of, you know, get a little bit of height and then a little bit of color. If you're looking for like larger spaces to fill in, there are a lot of nice native shrubs that would go well behind boxwoods, like 9-bark, smooth hydrangea, aromatic sumac, viburnum, and then rose mallow. Another thing we do is most people use evergreens for coverage. They want year-round interest, is what everybody says. Well, native grasses are the easiest way to create year-round interest. And so, like just this week, for example, somebody had used 3 yews to cover up the area where they keep their trash. And so we took 2 of them out. We left 1 because they still wanted 1. And then we'll be adding in native grasses along the whole back to cover up the area that was previously covered up by evergreens. And then we'll be planting native forbs and then like very low ground cover in front. But this was a great way to add native plants. And then for almost the entire year, except for probably 1 month in March when they cut down the last year's growth of the grasses and let the new ones pop up, they'll have coverage. So those are just a few things to do with evergreens.
So hostas, kind of over the years, it seems like hostas have just kind of became the default shade plant. But there is, in fact, actually a whole wonderful world of other shade plants out there. A lot of them are native. We happen to use celandine poppy quite a bit, Virginia bluebells kind of as intersperse. You know, this is something that you could very easily interplant in a bed with hostas. Ferns are great as well. You know, foliage stays through the season. Golden seals, while ginger can make a great ground cover in a bed like that. Salmon seal could be used maybe behind. Lots of times you'll see people use like hostas as like a bordering plant. So, you know, you throw some salmon seal behind that. Same with maybe Jacob's ladder. Anemones, depending on the species you're thinking of using, could either be a ground cover or more of like a mid-range flowering perennial. Combines can maybe interspersed. And, you know, it's like also, this is another plant that for, if you're establishing a new bed in somebody's yard, and if they're maybe on a budget and they don't have the money to fill an entire area with plants in one season, but they have a lot of hostas sitting around, you can go ahead and in spring, especially this time of year, dig those up, cut them in fours, and then spread them through very easily to fill in gaps in a new planting. For example, in this picture here, this is at a house that they had a lot of hostas, and we went ahead and are going through with a lot of new plants we are putting in. But in between these, we did divide quite a bit of the hostas just to fill gaps as a way of just cutting down on the plant costs for planting, using what's already there, and being able to fill a space. Ground covers. These are all pretty common in landscapes. Evergreen ground covers especially you see quite often. Quite a few of these can be pretty aggressive or invasive.
So back to the invasive species, if you happen to have euonymus ground cover, pull it out.
Yeah.
Rather than
it's a lot harder to fight on. And we found that, you know, vinca, at least you can kind of get away with, sometimes doesn't climb as much. So for example, in this photo, we planted an elderberry patch over top of a sloped hill that had vinca on it, and they still wanted some sort of ground cover there. And rather than, you know, the expense of pulling that all out, we just went ahead and planted the elderberries over top, and you know, they don't seem to be bothered. So
it's a good strategy too when you're trying to replace the vinca to put in larger shrubs like that, because they'll hold like the hill in place is what often we see is people having ground cover to cover a hill where it's too steep to mow. But once you add the shrubs in, they'll hold the hill in place, so you can slowly start to pull up that ground cover and replace it with something more native.
Absolutely. See, another ground cover that's seen a lot that we, you know, is easy also to scatter into a native planting is stone crops. You know, they're pretty much available at any garden center. They're also in a lot of yards. I see people have already used these in like rock gardens, full sun spots, as little border plants. They complement a lot of natives really well. You know, you can use it with coneflowers, coreopsis, laetris, native irises. Prickly pear and them go very well together, as in this picture here. Primrose, pussy toes can be a nice little ground cover with them. Up against grasses, they look really well. Blue grama, little blue stem. And also, it's another plant that's easy for somebody on a budget. If they already have a lot of this around, it's easy to go ahead, take little clippings off that and scatter it through your new native planting just to help fill spaces and create borders. So then another common groups of plants you see a lot in especially conventional landscapes is flowering trees and shrubs and ornamental trees. Fortunately, not over the years, a lot of these have been native. You know, you do every once in a while see the redbud or dogwood being used, but not necessarily all of these are native varieties. But and there was a lot of shrub selection. It tends that we do see people that select more things that are actually better for, you know, specific Northwest or Colorado or East Coast type of climate, where this is not what we actually have here. And a lot of those plants don't actually necessarily do the best here. So sometimes you'll see those things just limping along. And this is a good time that you can maybe switch these out for more native shrubs that would do better in the spot. But for places that want to keep their azaleas and rhododendrons and different hydrangea species, there's a lot of things you could add to those. Wild ginger, as we mentioned earlier, is a great ground cover that could be used with these. Ferns complement this look very good. Pawpaws kind of have a similar tropical look to them. Solomon seal as well. Jack in the pulpit's something very interesting that can be thrown into that look. If you're looking more to replace those things, but still have a lot of that ornamental value, redbuds, wild plums, as shown in this picture here, are great for springtime. Dogwoods, wild hydrangea, spicebush, elderberry, winterberry, all can be great alternative shrubs. Beautyberry is a good one as well. So there's a lot of different options out there, and yeah, don't be afraid to add some native plants to your conventional landscape. So yeah, in summary, I guess, yeah, pay attention to your area. Look at what's is currently in the gardens, research your plants, and then, yeah, start adding some natives to your conventional garden.
Yeah, just one is better than that.
That's right. Well, I think, yeah, that's all we got, so we're ready for questions.
Excellent. Thanks, Zach and Kristen. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, so to start off with, Claire asks, what ferns do you recommend?
So we use, and they're pretty easy to find a lot of places, but we use sensitive fern a lot, ostrich fern, maidenhair fern is pretty easy ones to just find around that a lot of people grow, but there is a whole bunch more cool native ferns than that, but those seem to be pretty common and fill in spaces, especially ostrich fern. Give a couple seasons and it spreads quite nicely and can fill in a good area.
Yeah, it's edible.
And it's edible. And lady fern's nice too.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. So as folks are entering your questions, if you would do that in the Q&A, it'll help us kind of keep track of them a little bit more easily. And Teresa's question is, any recommendation about mulching new plantings until they fill in?
So we do. I know other landscapers don't, but well, so oftentimes what we do is we go in with weed mat to kill whatever plants we don't want in an area. Then we mulch over that for a full season and then leave the mulch. But we find it best. It keeps the weeds down. It keeps the water in. And, you know, you don't want your soil drying out.
We do remove the weed mat though.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So we lay it down just to kill the weeds. And then before we plant, we pull it all out and then respread the mulch bag through. And that does work in some cases. Or, yeah, or if we're getting to just start by that we've cleared a space, we usually do mulch after we plant just for the first season.
Yeah, but only the first season.
Yeah.
Thanks. Amy has a question about Ajuga and whether or not it's native. And if not, do you have suggestions of things that could be planted either with Ajuga or instead of?
It's not native. And then, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different little ground covers you put in. The wild ginger could go with that. I have not done this yet, but the other day, or a job that we had looked at, someone had a lot of Ajuga, and we were thinking that round leaf groundsel would maybe be nice to intersperse with where they had kind of had some. So
yeah, similar leaves, similar bloom time, but yellow blooms as opposed to the blue that usually Ajuga has.
So, but yeah, there's all kinds of different ones. So that just can maybe work, but yeah.
Let's see, Ken's question. I've recently taken out a lot of bush honeysuckle. I want to replace them. How well would American bladdernut work? Do you have experience with that one?
It would, but a little bit. It depends on how quickly you want it to fill in. It's a little slower growing. Isn't it?
We have not planted that, so I don't know that I'd have experience for how quickly it fill in, or yeah, but sure, it would work.
Yeah, we tend to do like well, mostly we do like elderberries or choke cherries.
Christine asks, is there a source to help identify plants if you're really unfamiliar with plant species? Do you have any favorites there?
Yes, I meant to even mention that. But there's all kinds of wonderful resources. First off, the people hosting this is a wonderful resource, Deep Roots and Grow Native. But then also we use a lot of times, if I'm going to look up something real quick, Missouri Botanical Gardens website is wonderful. It has all kinds of information on it. It even usually has a little description of where things are on the wild. Missouri Conservation Department's website is great. Illinois wildflowers.org, I believe, has a lot of really good information. They even usually have some pretty good information on what it's a host plant to as well, if you're trying to get into that. But yeah, there's a lot out there, but those three is at least a good start.
Thanks. We'll list those links in the comments of this video too, once it's online. Is there more than one variety of celandine poppy?
No. There's just one native.
Just one native to here. Joy says, I've heard that to really support pollinator species, a native garden needs to have at least 25 species. Do you have any tips?
That is correct, and I've heard that as well. And yeah, I do think that works best also for just keeping diversity going. But yeah, I mean, just to make sure that you're getting to that point, sometimes in a small space, it's hard to get to that, of course, and especially if some people don't like to, I don't know, tossed of a salad look, I guess I've heard used as a term, but if you got a larger space, it's pretty easy to get to 25 plants. But also, if you're thinking of your whole yard, you're definitely going to get there, so it doesn't necessarily have to all be in just one small garden bed.
And then if you're starting to plant slowly, I would plant like season by season. I'd plant the more delicate plants first so they can get established, and then maybe plant the more aggressive ones. That way they don't take over the more delicate ones.
Good advice there. On that same note, let's see, where was that question? Pam asks, can you recommend some natives that don't spread as assertively, things that kind of stay put, stay in a clump?
Baptisias are great. They grow slowly, they spread very slowly, and they keep a great shape.
Yeah, totally. I guess for full sun or shade, or where are we kind of thinking for? I mean, there's a oh goodness, now I'm on the spot. But there's all I guess that your
Jack in the Pulpit for shade spreads fairly slowly. Solomon seal is colony forming, but you can easily keep it in check for shade, and then for sun, Baptisia.
Crown roots very slow, but will form a clump, You're not going to just reseed like crazy. Some of the coneflowers won't seed as wild as like yellow or gray-headed coneflower. Purple, like pale purple, wouldn't necessarily spread as fast. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Let's take time for just one or two more questions. One of the questions that I've seen a few times here is, where can we get native plants?
So, well, we're a nursery. We have an online store, and then there's Happy Apple Farms. There's So Wild Natives, and then there's Green Thumb Gardens. So Wild Natives is out in Independence. Happy Apple is in, I think, Tonganoxie in Kansas. And then Green Thumb has a little storefront on 31st and Troost. And then as soon as the stay-at-home order is lifted, we'll be open on 31st and Woodland, close to 31st and 71. But right now, Soil Service also has native plants. So, and they've really expanded their selection this year. So they have some.
Excellent. Thanks. Well, that link will also have available in the comments of the video and have that information on our website as well. Let's see. Let's pick a last one here. I have an area in my yard, this is from Nancy, covered in vinca. I want to extend an adjacent area with a native ground cover. Any suggestions for that?
So I have heard, we've started trying it in one spot in our house, but I've heard it even described as the native alternative to vinca, but Canadian anemone is what it's called, but it's a low-growing anemone. It spreads relatively quickly like vinca, and will make a dense ground cover and have a bunch of little white flowers. But we planted a small patch of it, and you're gonna see how well it takes off as a little pest before we start installing it in other gardens. But
that's our hopeful
go-to. That's our hopeful go-to as a good alternative. But so I don't know. We'll keep you updated.
Excellent. Thanks. Look forward to it. All right. Thanks, Zach and Kristen. I have just a couple of quick things to finish us up here. All right. So as we are finishing up today, I want to thank you guys for spending this time with us and thank everyone at home for joining us as well. If you have questions that we didn't address today, my contact information is on the screen, or questions about the series, feel free to reach out. If you if you asked a question in the Q&A and we didn't get to it, I will send those questions to you, Zach and Kristen, and we will get them sent out to you and posted in the comments of the video as well. So just be a little bit patient on that, and we will get those to you. After we finish today, please head on over to deeprootskc.org, where we have gathered a ton of resources to help you learn more about native plants and get started adding some natives to your space. When you're ready to purchase, after you've done your research, please check out the Find Plants link at the top of the page there. Here you'll find information both in general and specifically on how to safely purchase plants, native plants during our stay-at-home orders. You can also find the blue donate button at the top right corner of the homepage. If you're enjoying this series, we'd appreciate your support to help keep it going. And as we keep it going, we invite you to join us on Thursday afternoon when Matt Garrett, field biologist for Johnson County Parks, will take us on a virtual walk through a remnant prairie. So we're looking forward to that. Thank you for joining. Have a great afternoon.